Dear students, in the last video we had discussed the transition of feudalism to capitalism. In the last video we had discussed what is feudalism, what is capitalism, and how there was transition from feudalism to capitalism in Europe. Today in this video we will discuss about the causes that were responsible for the transition from feudalism to capitalism. The term transition means the process or a period of changing from one state or condition to another. Here, the transition was from the decline of feudalism to the rise of capitalism. The causes responsible for the decline of feudalism and that helped in the rise of capitalism are given below, or we will discuss one by one. First is, feudalism contained the seeds of self-destruction. The system of feudalism contained in itself the seeds of its destruction. In the words of Henry Martin, feudalism concealed in its bosom the weapons with which it would be itself one day smitten. In course of time, the feudal lords began to assert themselves too much and even did not obey the kings. Hence, the kings who headed the feudal hierarchy thought of bringing them under their control. In this matter, they got the support from the newly emerged middle classes and freemen who were not under the control of the feudal lords. So, these middle classes and freemen held the kings in the decline of feudalism. The next important point is emergence of the middle class. The emergence of the middle class also weakened the feudal structure. The middle classes consisting of traders and businessmen provided the king with money with which they began to maintain independent armies. The middle class people were also against the mischievous and exploiting feudal barons, and they were ready to help the king in crushing the power of the nobles. So, the middle class became a great weapon for the kings, to destroy the feudalism in Europe. Another important point is rise of towns and development of industries. The growth of towns and industries was a blow to feudalism and rise of capitalism. And the growth of in towns and industries was a blow to feudalism, and it helped in the rise of capitalism. Due to the growth of trade and commerce, industries in Europe received a boost. The merchants and artisans residing in the towns wished to free themselves from the control of feudal overlords. Therefore, they either purchased freedom or obtained it by force. They secured the right of self-government and freedom from feudal dues and taxes. After freeing themselves from the control of the nobles, the towns began to maintain their own armed militia and constructed high towers to protect themselves. Thus, the towns enabled the serfs to have their freedom from the claws of the feudal lords. The next important point is the Crusades. The Crusades, or the holy wars between the Christians and the Muslims, weakened the nobles, leading to the decline of feudalism. Many nobles from various Christian countries had gone to the east to take part in the Crusades. They lost heavily in the Crusades in terms of men and money. Many died, and those who returned had lost much of their wealth. The nobles, impoverished by the Crusades, began selling their feudal rights. The Crusades and Travel during the Middle Ages opened the new trade options for England. More trade saw the growth of more towns and thus more merchants, and the growth of towns and the more merchants or the increase of merchants helped in the decline of feudalism in Europe. Then another important point is emergence of strong monarchy. The emergence of powerful kings in several countries went far in bringing about the decline of feudalism. Strong kings like Henry VII in England seriously planned to put down the nobles. They had the moral and material support of the middle class. When gunpowder was discovered, kings made it their monopoly. In England, Henry VII used gunpowder to batter the walls of the baronial castles in which the nobles had entrenched themselves. As Europe became safer, merchants invaded the rural society, giving way to wealthy towns and cities. Vassals and fiefs were replaced by private armies and commoners, as merchants became the new source of power for the kings. Then another important point is also the Renaissance. The Renaissance in Europe widened the outlook of the people of Europe. They now came to know about the exploitation and torture made by the European feudal lords. So, kind of voice was raised in the mind of all the intellectuals against this feudal system. So the Renaissance also played a significant role in the decline of feudalism. The impact of new ideas. Another important point is the impact of new ideas. The impact of new ideas was against feudalism. As feudalism had outlived its purpose, it had to go. In the Dark Age, people were in need of protection from nobles and barbarians. Such protection was no more needed. People who were increasingly becoming conscious of their rights were no more prepared to tolerate the tyranny of the feudal lords. The next important point is liberation of the serfs. The liberation of the serfs, due to enormous growth in trade and commerce, also greatly contributed to the decline of feudalism. With the growth of trade and commerce, a number of new cities and towns grew which provided new opportunities for work. The serfs got an opportunity to free themselves of the feudal lords. According to a custom, a serf could not run away from the manor. If he left the manor and was detected, he would be brought back to the manor, but if he ran away to a nearby town and evaded detection for 1 year, and one day after his escape he would earn his freedom. Many serfs escaped to the towns and evaded detection for a period longer than the stipulated period. And by this, day by day the serfs decreased, and this helped in the decline of feudalism in Europe. Then another point is peasant revolts of 14th century. The feudal system placed heads of groups between the monarchs and inhabitants, thereby increasing tension between the common folk and the monarch. Peasant revolts ensued all over Europe in the 14th century, which resulted in the old system being broken up and the beginning of the modern capitalism. The next important point is growth of communications. Another factor was the increase of communication, which broke down the isolated homesteads, assisted the rise of towns, and facilitated the emergence of the middle class. This process was greatly accelerated in the 14th century and did much to destroy the feudal classifications of society. Towns and cities in turn provided alternative employment opportunities, improving the livelihoods of the peasants, and in the process encouraging rural to urban migration. The migration from the rural to urban areas helped in the decline of feudalism and paved the way for the rise of capitalism. Then another important point is the expansion of trade and commerce. One of the major factors that led to the transition from feudalism to capitalism was the expansion of trade. Merchants began to prosper as Europe became more stable. There was a unique class of individuals in that they were not bound by obligations, thereby conducting trade in their own interest, or else everything would come to a standstill. Merchants started to transform society from subsistence to economic one, thereby revitalizing the notion of capital gain. The new merchant class also provided important money for kings who stood much to gain by encouraging their trade. Another important point is the establishment of standing army. Now the monarchs could get money with the help of the merchants and build standing armies that were only loyal to the king instead of relying on the commoners for military force. The private army had few loyalties except to money and were feared all through Europe. The threat of mercenaries led to the employment of professionally trained private soldiers, the standing armies, and ultimately the end of feudalism in Europe and a rise of capitalism in Europe. Then another important point is the Black Death and the demographic crisis in 14th century. The Black Death, which occurred between 1348 to 1350, severely decreased Europe's population, thereby making labor a valuable commodity. The lords tracked their tenants as capital pleaded for labor. All provisions to control labor proved futile as poor men entered into service of their own lords as hired laborers. Another factor that weakened feudalism was the demographic crisis in the 14th century. The Great Famine of from 1315 to 1317 also led to a decline in agricultural production, meaning the lords had come up with the new strategies to obtain substantiality. So anyway, this Black Death and demographic crisis also helped in the decline of feudalism and rise of capitalism. Then decline of manorial system. The growing agricultural production led to the decline of manorial system. The feudal lords started depending more on cities for the demand of luxury items. They needed money for the purpose. To meet their need for money, they started renting their land to peasants in exchange for money rent. In this process, they simply became the landlords, and in most of the cases absentee landlords, and day by day their power and position declined. Next is the appearance of nation states. This period also witnessed the appearance of nation states. The monarchs needed help from the emerging capitalist class to fight against the war with the feudal lords. The capitalists provided resources to monarch to fight wars, and in return the monarch promised them military support and freedom from various rules and regulations of the manorial control. And these factors or these causes were responsible for the decline of feudalism and helped in the rise of capitalism in Europe. Thank you. Dear students, in this video we will learn about the problems of transition part 2. This is regarding the industrial production. So let us know what is industrial production. This industrial production we are learning in the problems of transition, as in the last video I have already discussed. The problems of transition from feudalism to capitalism consists of two aspects. First is economic expansion and second is industrial production. In the last video we have already discussed about the economic expansion, and in this video we will learn about the industrial production. So let us know what is this industrial production. Industrial production is a measure of output of the industrial sector of the economy. The people of medieval Europe were self-dependent. There were no such big industries existed like today, but there were different industries like wool or textile industry, mining industry, etc. However, their main focus was on development in advanced equipment for agriculture and innovative methods of cultivation. We get very few sources regarding the organization of industrial production in early medieval period. Early medieval Europe. In spite of that, people of medieval Europe were advanced in establishing industries. The major event in Europe's history during the early Middle Ages was the development of agriculture between 6th to late 18th centuries. During this period, a noble system of agriculture appropriated to the northern lands emerged. Different elements of it got materialized and consolidated into a new pattern of cultivation which spread to various parts of Europe. This proved to be the most productive agrarian method in relations to manpower that the world had ever seen. So first we will discuss about this innovation of agriculture, innovation in agricultural field. In this connection, the first major innovation was the use of heavy wheeled plough. Now people started cultivating using the technologies, or the advancement of technology helped them in producing more and more agricultural products. So it was the heavy wheeled plough was used to deal with heavy soils instead of light scratch plough of the ancient period. The new plough spread from the Slavs in the 6th century to Po Valley in the 7th century, Germany in 8th century, and Britain in 9th century. So it spread, revolutionized both agricultural techniques and and the relations among cultivators in manorial communities. The new plough was most efficiently used if peasants tilled strips of land and needing 8 rather than 2 oxen to pull it. This encouraged the peasants to pool their resources through a new emphasis on communal cooperation. So, this innovation, the heavy plough, the open fields, the new integration of agriculture and herding, three-fold rotation, the modern horse harness and the nailed horse shoes and the whippletree had combined into a total system of agrarian development by the year 1100 AD. So, this development provided a zone of peasant prosperity stretching right across northern Europe from Atlantic to the Danube in Russia. So, besides agricultural industry, we can say it as a kind of industry, agriculture as a kind of industry. So, in the next point we will discuss about the different industries that developed during this period in Europe. Besides advancement in agricultural equipments and improvement in the methods of cultivation, the people of medieval Europe were accustomed with some industries for their necessities like wool or textile industry, mining industry, etc. In general, the medieval people were self-supporting. Most of what they needed was made and found locally. The sheep they raised provided mutton and wool. Hemp and flax was gathered from the fields and woven into cloth. The hides of the animals were tanned to produce leather, and wood from trees was used to keep the blacksmith's furnaces burning. Potters might not be found locally, but the average medieval person would not have to go far to find someone who was making pottery items. The modern system of concentrated manufacturing had come about because of machinery and means of transport that make it possible to produce and transport goods more cheaply than locally by hand. Although these industries were practiced across the whole of the country, such as weaving cloth, tanning hides and blacksmiths producing metal goods, some industries were concentrated in certain areas. Not all areas were rich in iron ore or hard clay for pottery, or for instance, it was industries such as mining that could only exist where the mineral could be found. So, let us discuss about this mining industry. In medieval Europe, coal was mined and used in the production of iron. Most of the coal was mined from the open cast mines, and where the coal seams were easily found on or just below the surface of the land. When the easily mined coal began to run out, people tried to sea coal. The name sea coal is brought to thought to have been used because the coal was found washed off on beaches, but this seems unlikely. Now, regarding this coal industry, the coal was the easiest of the minerals to find and simply could be dug off, but other minerals such as tin and lead could only be found in certain areas of England. Cornwall was important for the amount of tin that was mined there, whereas Derbyshire was important for the amounts of lead and silver. It is a county in the East Midlands of England. Henry II granted licenses to those who wanted to dig mines in the royal forests. Due to the skill of miners digging for these special minerals, the miners became a privileged group. They developed their own codes and were not taxed like other medieval people. They were exempt from normal military service, but due to their specialist skills could be expected to help dig the mines that were dug beneath castle walls to bring them down. Then the next important industry was the wool industry or textile industry. From 12th century onwards, wool was the staple industry of England. The production of good quality woolen cloth from the home market began to expand in the 14th century. The home-based woolen industry was made possible, at least in part, by the introduction of water-powered fulling stocks. Fulling stocks means pleat or fabric so as to make a garment full. Fulling was a vital process in the production of cloth, converting a relatively loosely woven fabric into a close-knit one by soaking it in fresh, clean water and fuller's earth and then pounding it by foot. Fulling stocks, heavy wooden hammers driven by water wheels, achieved the same result, less than labor and great efficiency. So during the reign of Henry VII, a fulling mill was constructed on the river Darent at the foot of what is now East Hill, close to the town centre. So wool was a very important trade of England in the medieval times, and large amounts of wool were produced and exported. Then the lime industry. Lime or calcium oxide was used for the manufacturing of mortar and also a fertilizer. It was discovered in medieval times, and that made that lime improved soil structure and neutralized excessive soil acidity, leading to increased crop yields. From lime burning, only broken chalk was required. This was usually quarried right next to the lime kiln site. Lime was obtained by burning chalk in a specially constructed lime kiln. Most medieval lime kilns were 10 to 12 feet in diameter, walled around to 3 to 4 feet high, with draught tunnels at the base. Inside the kiln, a fire of brushwood was made and broken chalk added to alternate layers with the fuel to the top of the wall, and this was continued up to making a heaped top. The whole was covered with slabs of turf and left burn for a week or two. By 13th century, lime kilns were being built with a tapering bowl-shaped interior with 1 or 2 wind tunnels set into the base. Wood was the main fuel used in lime kilns, but was gradually replaced by coal after 1500. And the earliest written reference to this industrial activity at Dartford dates from 1445. So next is the chalk industry. The chalk industry was also existed during the medieval period in Europe. The area around Dartford is characterized by man-made structures became known as den holes. These features consist of a well-like shaft dug through the strata into the chalk. So next is milling industry. Of all the machines in use, the mill was most widespread. It turned wind or water power into cost-effective energy for grinding flour, turning leather, processes, cloth, and a variety of other tasks. The mills played an important economic role in medieval society, although the initial investment in mill machinery and plant was excessive and the long-term return in profits was excellent. So, next is the metal work. A very high standard of metal work was achieved by medieval craftsmen. Goldsmiths and silversmiths produced outstanding pieces. Pewter, which is a mixture of tin and copper or lead, was used in medieval times for making all kinds of goods. Next important point is the other industries. Woodworkers. Among the other industries, the woodworkers were in high demand as most of the houses and day-to-day utensils were made from wood. Clay potters also made many of the products and that were required in medieval times. Plates, bowls and jars made from clay were common in Europe. So, let us come to the conclusion. Thus, in a whole, we can say that the feudalism appeared around 300 AD and started declining with the beginning of Renaissance in Europe. Feudalism ultimately disappeared only by 1500 AD and led to the beginning of capitalism. The economic expansion is measured as one of the problems of transition from feudalism to capitalism. The economy of medieval Europe during the transition period was based primarily on farming, but as time went on, trade and industry became more important. The towns grew in number and size and merchants became more important, and thus it paved the way for the rise of capitalism. So, thank you.